Hi there and welcome to this tip. I'd like to say the inspiration for this is some deep psychological thing, but actually I was inspired to give this tip by a Brains Out series. Expeditionary Force is a series of really rubbish sci-fi novels by a chap called Craig Allen. It's the sort of thing you want to read when you just want to take your head out, you don't want to think about anything. But in it, he uses this American military acronym I'd not heard before, which is BLUFF, and he asks people to bluff it out for them. In the American military, that means bottom line, up front first. And I thought, wow, that is such a really good acronym for people to be able to use. And certainly a lot of my coaching is when people are coming up a level or having to communicate with more seniors, is they need to learn to bluff. Bottom line, up front first. And that's clearly a really good tip, and it's a tip for you to give your people. But I wanted to unpick it a bit to really get into some of the psychological stuff behind it, so people can understand what is going on, not only for them but also for their populations. And one of the reasons this is so important, if we look at Jungian preferences and the way that people like to take in information, there are two ways of looking at this. There's some people prefer to take in information through a preference called sensing. And when I say preference, I don't mean I consciously prefer to do something. A preference, I mean like handedness. I'm right-handed and I prefer to use my right hand. It's easier. I can also use my left hand. And I realise this video may be mirrored, so that's my right hand. So you have sensing types, and those people prefer to take in information through their senses. And what I mean by that, everybody takes in information through their senses. I mean, they like to take in information through what they can see, hear, feel, touch and smell in the moment. And they're interested in practical, pragmatic things in the now, and they trust what they've experienced. But the other preference is intuition. And they're less bothered about that, they clearly do that, but they're interested in much more what could be, in a future focus. And they like abstract theory and the connectedness with stuff rather than just what is concrete. Now you've got these two preferences. And why this is so important is in the general UK population, only about 23% of the population is intuitive. In the US is around 22%. Now if you just look at, and I'm going to quote some figures that are taken from this book, Type Talk at Work. And the research quoted in here is for US populations. But if we look at the entry-level management population, it is 22% intuitive. But if we look at the executive level, it's 33.9%. So you're taking a relatively, a significant minority, but a large minority way of looking at things, and that's how a lot of the executive population either use it, that's how they like to do it, or they learn to do it that way because they all have to have a future focus, which is much more of an intuitive preference. Intuitives, their natural preferences lend themselves to looking at strategy. But if we look at just a couple of those preference types, INTJs, which are pretty rare in the population, they're about 3% of the US population, that they account for 15.8% of the executive population. So a big difference. ENTJs, they make about 2% of the US general population, or rather entry-level management population, 9.4% of the executive level. So when you're communicating with the executive levels, they're much more likely to be intuitive in preference, and they will have learned, and they'll probably be a bit more impatient. So I just want to use my wife and I as the examples here, so you can, if you're not familiar with Jungian preferences, you can really, really get it. My wife is dominant sensing, and when she had an apple presented to her on this individual who's doing her Myers-Briggs, an apple presented to her on her hand and said, "What pops into your mind?" She looked at it and she went, "It's an apple." And when pressed, she eventually said, "It's a green apple. I think it might be a French Golden Delicious." She's bothered about real concrete reality. And she understands things by knowing the detail, and that's the thing to get about sensing types. They need to know the detail to understand things, at least the introverted sensing types. Now, when I was presented with the same exercise, I didn't mention the apple at all. I said cider, safe jobs, gravity, the Beatles, all things I can connect to an apple, but not to the apple itself. So there's a massive difference there. But so if you're a sensing type, you actually prefer the detail, and you will explain things by saying there's this thing, then this thing, then this thing, and this thing. And if you understand all of these things, this is the bigger picture. If I'm intuitive, I am not interested in all of those details. I get bored really quickly, and I just say, no, just bluff it out for me. Give me that end thing first. And if I need the detail, I'll ask for it. And so sensing types have to learn to bluff it out and give an intuitive way of communicating for their seniors in general. But it's really important for the seniors to understand that you may get there really quickly. You have me learn to do that. It's been shown by research that if we look at change scenarios, executives get there much more quickly because they're comfortable with the idea of change. There's more intuitives in that population. They tend to like change. But your people will not get there as quickly. And we have to understand that in general, they need the detail to understand things. So you may give them a metaphor, you may give them the big picture, but in order for them to truly understand it, you need to be able to give them the detail. Even if that detail is, we don't know yet, but we are thinking about it, that's important for them to know. So I know that some of you will already be familiar with MBTI and Jungian preferences, but I love that expression, BLUFF. Bottom line, up front first. So it's something you can use, something you can use with your people. Just please do understand that there are lots of people out there that need the detail, they need the concrete. And if they don't get it, they're just not going to understand it. I hope you've enjoyed this. Cheers. Bye.